All right, joining us to discuss this development is a global affairs analyst, Nweke, who is joining us via Skype from Belgium. Good to have you on the news. Well, like they say, when the U.S., China sneeze, the rest of the world catches cold. Look at the larger ramifications of this trade dispute between the U.S. and China.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Ngozi, for having me. Indeed, not only that when these two giants, sneezes, the rest of the world catches cold. It is also true that being economic elephants, when they fight, those of us, those other countries, as the grass, indeed begin to suffer. And it is not the first time we're seeing this kind of thing happening. You will recall that in 1929, in the run-up to the Great Depression, what actually triggered that depression, although some modern-day economists have tried to disprove it, is the fact that tariffs were raised for over 20,000 items, trade items at the time, just equivalent to what we're seeing at this moment, which hurt production at the time, and then also triggered a whole lot of retaliatory tit-for-tat moves by several countries affected by this. And so we had that, great job loss and the Great Depression. Now, the fear is that similar thing can begin to happen. Don't forget that the immediate reaction of China when this happened earlier on was to retaliate also in kind. And I believe that a few other countries that are affected may do the same. And, the wider ramification is actually, cold catching, as a matter of fact.
And like you said, it looks like nobody is learning from history. What happened before, these trade wars have always been a precursor to even more serious problems like the Great Depression that you talked about. Now, Trump is accusing China of unfair trade. Is there an element of truth in that? And how can things begin to really change? Because the two-day talks now have failed. They've not yielded any results so far.
Yes, indeed. Listen, there is no doubt about the fact that China undertakes quite a number of very, very unfair international trade practices. And I will just, restrict this to just one example, and that is the area of intellectual property rights. Now, what China does in a very subtle manner is they compel their companies to partner with foreign companies as, a precursor to doing business in China. And then what they do, what the Chinese partner companies eventually do is deep into the technologies that are brought into their countries and then steal those technology and find one excuse or the other to get rid of the other company, whereas they have run off with the intellectual property of those countries. That is very despicable, and indeed goes against the World Trade Organization and other international trading organizations rules. So there is no doubt about that. Now, what we see as a problem is the way and manner that the U.S., and it is not just Donald Trump, the way and manner successive U.S. governments have actually tried to respond to this sort of practice by going it all on their own, unilateralism, and then putting together some sort of protectionist, policies to counter China.
In other words, what you're saying very briefly is the U.S. way right now is not the solution.
No, it is certainly not the solution. The solution is team up with the rest of, the Committee of Nations, because you speak the same language. I mean, in terms of understanding one another and agreeing that, indeed, China is trying to be the bully of the neighborhood.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Nweke, a global affairs analyst, joining us on The World Now. Thank you so much for your insight.